You got nothing left to lose tonight. In the end we'll see a change. Only love lasts, only love. The night we shall go in, will you follow me down, 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 down? It's the crime of the century we fight, but the reason honoring everyone we left behind. Still alive, it's brought back to every kind. Give me everything you got, let's leave this world behind.
Good evening, everybody. Jacob Daniel here. Another episode of the Daniel 3 podcast, episode 72. Got a pretty cool conversation that I'm going to have in store for you guys tonight with a couple of guests. Before we get started, first, as always, got to plug Rabbit Eye Blueberry Wine. If Jesus walked the earth today and was still turning water into wine, I hope that it would be Rabbit Eye Blueberry Wine, because it's the only wine that true believers would drink. So rabbiteyewine.com, support libertarian small businesses. Other than that, I don't have too much to say in the introduction here. Gonna keep that nice and short. So we got two guests tonight, and one of them is a returning guest, and I'll bring them up first. It is Caleb Brown from Faith, Liberty, and Praxis. Caleb, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. You popped me in at the worst moment. It's in my forehead and just completely sewed my bald spots. You picked the worst moment. Thank you for that, Jacob. You bring me in and insult me right away. I feel loved.
That's how I show love. Is I insult and rib and make fun of you, and that's how you know I care.
I do the same. So we're right there.
Right. Cool. It's been a little while since you've been on. I think about 3 or 4 months. So you were about due to come back on. So
there's been some major changes in my ideology and what I believe. So it's to be interesting tonight.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit. So, or maybe I'll just put you back down into the lobby for the rest of the conversation, because we don't believe in free speech anymore.
This is your property. I can't blame you for it.
That's true. All right. Second guest. So they are going to go by, I'm going to call them AC for the rest of the conversation. They are on Twitter. Their name is Anarcho-Catholic, and the Twitter handle is Ayn as in like Ayn Rand and Catholicism. And I've been following them for a little while on Twitter, and always like what they have to say. He's been on Caleb's show before, and so tonight we're going to have a conversation, and I'm going to ask some questions and get to know him a little bit more. So AC, how you doing tonight?
Doing well. You brought me at the worst possible moment too. The hair is all messed up and the cross isn't straight. Doing well, Jacob. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, of course. So Caleb, you've been on the show, and but it's been a little while, so why don't you give a little bit of a just introduction again of who you are and what you talk about on your podcast.
Sure. Well, my name's Caleb. I run Faith, Liberty, and Praxis. But basically all I do is book clubs. So the episodes don't come out often, but when they come out, I like to think they're pretty good. I also run the Austro-Thomism website with Eincast and another guy called Belkov. We put out this mixing of Austrian economics and Thomism. We put out a lot of good Catholic content over there. Politically speaking, I don't know where I am. I'm as far right wing as you can be. That's about where I'm at. But besides that, nothing there. Just I have fun talking to people, and I think I'm not interesting, but I have interesting guests on, so good enough.
The crap, I had a question and I already forgot it. That's how uninteresting you are, Caleb. You made me completely forget what I was gonna say.
Tell my table host. Imagine talking to the guy and he's like, to answer your question, I don't care.
I was gonna say I know what Thomism is, but maybe for those who don't know, maybe explain it.
Now, Thomism is the fruition of Aristotelianism, the philosophy of Aristotle. Thomism is the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas, which is built on Catholicism, Christianity, and Aristotle and Augustine. It's just it's in my opinion the only legitimate philosophy out there today. Like everything else that's very popular today is kind of trash in comparison. It doesn't understand reality, metaphysics, or the mind body. Doesn't understand anything. And so if you can be a fan of the philosophy and learn from them, but really if you have to call it anything and you're not going by Aristotelian or Thomist, I don't think you know enough to go and talk about anything.
Okay, we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. AC, your first time on my show, and you're one of those weird people that likes to go anonymous on Twitter. To try to, I guess, I mean, good on you, I guess, for trying. See how long that holds out. But without getting too personal, I guess maybe explain a little bit about yourself and kind of what your beliefs are.
Sure, until the Washington Post does an expose on me, right? If I get too big,
right?
So yeah, cradle Catholic, like Caleb, pretty, I guess a right-leaning anarchist at this point. Yeah. So when Caleb started up Austro-Thomism, hopped on as one of the contributing writers. Done a couple roundtables with him, but yeah. So I'd say. Just like with Caleb, the philosophy, and that's really where my biggest interest lies, is coming in with the ground level philosophy and then building up what we know from that. And that starts with Aristotle and it goes through St. Thomas, and then borrows heavily from a lot of 20th century thought, especially about Austrian economics, von Mises, Rothbard, and Hoppe. So yeah, and I think the name that we had for Caleb's project of Austro-Thomism really sort of summarizes pretty well where I'm trying to fall in my philosophy and my politics.
The name goes out to Gold Guy on Twitter at BillionBoy22, I think is his handle. We were going to call it Paleo-Thomism because it was right wing, but he said, hey, it's called Austrian Thomism, and he tweeted at us 3 days in a row to change it, and so we did change it.
Okay, so I guess so what you're saying is peer pressure wins.
Well, you're right.
All right. Well, I guess let's get into the conversation a little bit. So I'm familiar with Thomas Aquinas, but maybe we could, you guys could just explain a little bit about his background and sort of maybe just, I don't know, like the basics, like if you had to give like a 5-minute elevator pitch for what Thomism is and sort of what the basic philosophical approach and worldview is. Maybe each of you kind of take a turn taking a shot at it. I guess we'll go in reverse order. AC, why don't you go first?
Sure. Well, like Caleb mentioned, the grounding for St. Thomas's work was Aristotle.
Well, that's cool. My cup is green enough that it just completely disappears.
I thought, I was thinking you had a transparent cup because I'm an idiot and forgot you've got a green screen.
You can kind of see it on my fingers that it's like yellowish green, but like, oh, that's so cool. All right,
you're streaming from
my
the
new favorite
metaverse.
Cup. Right? Yeah.
But yeah, so the basis is in Aristotle. I'm trying. St. Thomas got a translation of Aristotle into whatever his vernacular was. I'm blanking on what he would have read it in.
Flint's.
Yeah, I think you're right. But and as Caleb said, it's the right philosophy. St. Thomas wouldn't have called himself a Thomist. He wouldn't. The sort of modern trend is to sit and say, okay, here's my idea of philosophy, and take Rand for example. Here's objectivism. Here's my conception of what philosophy should be, and Aquinas wouldn't have thought about it that way. Aristotle wouldn't have thought about it that way. They're trying to discover how the world works. And if they're doing it correctly, you can't say, well, I have a different opinion. Like either they're right or they're wrong. And it's this grounding in reality. Is, Aristotle starts from the physical. He defines what physics is. He says, okay, these are the things we know about physical things, and you build a understanding of everything from those ground realities that aren't debatable. That it's just like, this is what's true. This thing is in front of me, and that's what we all have to do. We don't really think about that, but you don't really, we are blank slates in a sense. If we don't have other ideas that we sort of can build off of, we start with those things that we know, and that's where understanding comes from. And so the philosophy of Aristotle and then Aquinas is building up everything we can that's from the real. And Aquinas' great contribution is that he can go all the way from that through Aristotle and does a lot of really good writing on Aristotle, and can make some very impressive theological discoveries and understand more about the nature of the mysteries of the Catholic Church or the nature of God. But it's all based on the fundamental and the real, and there's no suppositions in there. There's no axioms. There's principles of reality that we know are true, and then the use of reason to try and build from those.
Yeah, I remember the first time I was introduced to Aquinas was sort of, I think one of the things he's more famous for is trying to make the argument for God from I guess like the argument of the unmoved mover, or I don't know exactly how he put it, but and there's been many renditions of that since then. But yeah, it seems like he, definitely somebody who, from what I know about him, was trying to have his foundation, I guess, start with reason and then and logic and empirical reality, and then kind of build from there and and sort of prove the Bible as opposed to the theological camp that that I'm more loosely associated with in the Reformed camp. They typically start from a different foundation. They start more with the Bible and then work their way out from there. So, but yeah, that's interesting. Caleb, do you have anything you'd want to add to that as far as what sort of again the basic elevator pitch or summary or most important tenets of what Thomism is?
I would say one of the more important tenets of Thomism that kind of influence a lot of it is the coming together of faith and reason to the absolute best of what those both can do. And so it's a big emphasis on reason, big emphasis on faith, properly understood faith, properly understood reason. And it's not dualistic, but it's accepting that human beings are I think the word's hylomorphic, is that we are corporeal, but we also have an immaterial mind, except for immaterial things. And so there's a big emphasis that it's not one or the other. It's like there is the law of non-contradiction, but we are beings that are corporeal and have immaterial aspects to us. And so there's I think understanding that is to understand a lot more of what Aquinas writes about.
What So here's a question that pops into mind, and if there isn't an answer, that's fine. I'm just curious if there is one. Would Aquinas or Catholicism in general have anything to say as to where, like, is God the source of the laws of logic, or are the laws of logic sort of like are they, do they sort of exist separate from God, or like do they always exist with God and are a part of God? This is something that I remember when like William Lane Craig had a debate with James White on a separate. It was like a debate on Molinism. But they got into this kind of like, are things true because God dictates they're true, and kind of like a truth maker theory, or is it more that things are true because logic is sort of a either something that is part of God or is sort of separate, and like the laws of logic are true and eternal in the same way that God is. What are your thoughts on that?
I got you. Want to take this one? You want me to?
Yeah, sure. I can give an attempt at this, and please chime in as you're able. I would say I think the understanding from Aquinas and from I think even from Aristotle that I would probably agree with. The laws of logic don't have some special ground. We tend to have these concepts that we put them in sort of Platonic ideal. There's sort of this realm of ideas that act on the world. The laws of logic are things that you derive from reality. If you sit there and say that something is or isn't, and it can't be both, that's something you observe. That's something that you derive from the observable world. As I notice, okay, either my computer is sitting in front of me, or it's not sitting in front of me, and it can't be doing both. Right. So that's a property of reality. That's where the law comes from. It's not that it's acting on reality. Reality behaves the way it is. Reality is. And one of the things that I notice about the nature of reality is that things are or they aren't.
Okay.
So go ahead.
So you could say God created reality, and when God created reality, part of what is inherent in reality is sort of like consistency, logic, and things do not contradict, and this is kind of part of the natural order that God created. Is that kind
Yeah,
of
I
fair
think
to
that's
say?
fair. I think, and it's the way things. I mean, it's we can't really imagine things otherwise. Could he have made a reality that was? I mean, saying reality is inconsistent is a contradiction already. I mean, that's a paradox, or what's the word I'm thinking of? Anyways, it doesn't make sense to sit there and talk about, like, I mean, when we say something makes sense, the word sense is from sense reality. The laws of logic are conditioned by reality. Reality is the way it is, and we observe it, and we can write some laws down about it.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's interesting. It's definitely something that I've often I've spent a lot of time in my, just in my deep philosophical thought throughout the last couple of years thinking about. So trying to think where I want to go next, because there's a lot of different ways we could go from here. I guess what would say where does is the Austria part, so the Austrian economic or Austrian libertarian part, is that something that you would say is just an addition to the Thomist philosophy, or do you think that did Aquinas speak anything about economics or politics and it's compatible, or even maybe a precursor to Austrian theory?
If you read Murray Rothbard's History of Economic Thought, you will see that he does trace Austrianism. Some people trace it to was it Kant, and say a lot of Mises Epistemology is Kantian. I don't think so. I think he traces a lot of the Austrian principles to the Scholastics. What's what Thomists? You could say Thomist, Scholastic, and pretty much interchangeable. And so you could trace a lot of it back to the early Scholastics. I'm terrible at remembering names of anybody who's not Aquinas, so I can't name any of them. But if anyone wants to know about it, I would say his book on it covers it. And Murray Rothbard's his chapter on Aquinas is on MisesInstitute.com, and it's really interesting, really good. Aquinas was not great on economics. He did kind of have some of the same problems Aristotle had, but people who came after him really did get economics right. And so I think you can make a strong case for Austrianism being, if Thomism was to have an economic system a part of it, it would look very similar, if not exactly the same as Austrianism.
And I think to the degree that the Scholastics sort of started that tradition in a lot of ways, and Caleb's absolutely right. You can trace back a lot of those ideas to the I think the mid Scholastics.
And
but in terms of it,
who are the Scholastics? Just for clarification,
they were the Thomists, pretty much. They were just they were just Catholic philosophers or priests or Dominicans, something like that, who were
so just Catholics that came after Aquinas who were influenced by his work.
I mean, pretty much. It gets kind of confusing with the different schools of thought inside Catholicism, because there's Augustinian and Thomism, but they're both doctors.
We'll get to that, yeah.
So it gets a little confusing, but the Scholastics were the economically inclined ones, I believe.
I will say it's not just like the Thomistic school. Like Thomas was a Scholastic, but it's the most of the big church thinkers of that era. So St. Thomas was the 13th century, I think. So typically, I think starting somewhere around the 1100s to maybe 1400 or so, it's a lot of the philosophy coming out of the church in that time is was part of the Scholastic tradition.
Okay,
St. Thomas being the biggest name from that.
Okay. So Caleb brought up something, which is another thing I wanted to get into, which is a little off topic from Austro-Thomism, but it still kind of relates to the broader conversation I wanted to have. One of the things I've started to see as I've started to kind of dip my toe into learning more about Catholicism from someone of a Reformed Protestant background is that there seems to be it's not as monolithic as I assumed it would be. There are I've heard speak to what Caleb already gave reference to, that there's different orders. Like there's the Augustinians, there's the what's the one the
Jesuits,
Jesuits,
Franciscans, and Dominicans. I said three that I can name. I think there's more, but I think
there's even more than that, because I remember listening to, there was like this one Catholic podcast I tuned in on, and they were like just they went through all of them. And I think there was like 8 or 9 that they listed. So but what is sort of like the, I don't know, the origin or the reasons or the ways that's kind of developed, and how does that work within Catholicism, these different orders and
before we answer that question, I would like to bring up that anyone who thinks that Catholicism is so like one pure monolithic ideology that has like strict rules you have to adhere to, there were debates between the Jesuits and the Dominicans where they literally tried to clear them with heretics, and the Pope had them locked in cages for why they were yelling at each other. They tried to hurt each other. So it's the idea that it's one monolithic religion is just not borne out by history, because I think it was I can't remember the exact story, but I read somewhere that Pope basically said, you guys can no longer declare other people heretics for a while because you keep declaring everyone else on the opposite end heretics. And so the church has pretty much, I'll use an example when it comes to this, because Saul was evolution in young earth. The church does not have a strict teaching on evolution in young earth. You can believe in young earth, you can believe in evolution, he's one. All you have to do is accept that at one point in evolution, when Homo sapiens evolved to the point God breathes a soul into them. And you don't have to, so you don't have to hold these ones. They have a scaffolding and say, okay, you have to be within these boundaries, and that's not heresies. But inside those boundaries are all acceptable differences. And so it's, I don't know if I guess I'm to take it from there, but that's my answer to the question.
Yeah, I can add a little bit more. So in terms of whether or not the church is a monolith or not, and to some extent it certainly is. There's the idea that Rome has spoken, and if the church has made a determination on something, that's what Catholics are supposed to believe. Where a lot of the sort of religious orders come from is oftentimes throughout the history of the church, there'll be some issue or some problem that someone will come along and realize that something is missing from people's spiritual lives, or there's some kind of need for something. So like with the Franciscans, there's they notice issues with what am I trying to say? Sorry, I'm just completely losing my train of thought. But they take these extreme vows of poverty. There's this idea that, okay, we're getting too materialistic. We need to sort of end these things. And it's never that, one group says this, another group says this, and they're in conflict. They can just be different focuses on different ideas. So one order might sit there and say, okay, charity is the most important things for us. We want to really try and emphasize charitable good works. Other ones can be more theologically motivated and more interested in philosophy. And it's like any other kind of organization, you have specialization within it. There's groups that say, okay, This is what's really important to us. This is what we're going to focus on. And again, these can evolve sort of separately from each other. And that's, sometimes they have disputes, and sometimes, Rome needs to intercede and sit there and say, okay, this is the right answer. Or, it might not really matter for salvation. You guys can have your differences of opinion, and that's okay.
This reminds me of a joke. It's a funny joke about the whole different orders, but it kind of illustrates the point. Do you know the difference between a Dominican and a Franciscan is? It's not Jesuits. Dominicans are founded to combat the heresy of Albigensianism. Jesuits are founded to combat the heresy of Protestantism. Have you ever met any Albigensians? They're founded to combat. A lot of them are founded to combat certain things, and I think that joke kind of illustrates that a little bit.
Okay. I'm curious because of all of them, the one I'm the most curious about, and I've tried to learn more about, but I can't find much on. I don't know if either of you know much about the Augustinians, because St. Augustine is sort of the one who, if I was going to look back into the Catholic Church and find someone who is closest to where I'm at theologically, it would be Augustine. But I don't know much about the Augustinian Catholics. I don't know if either of you know much about them, or
I don't know a lot about Augustine. Sadly, I need to read more on Augustine. I know Popular Liberty prefers Augustine to Aquinas, so he's probably better to talk to about that.
That's why we get along so well.
Yeah, I think that might be actually it. He's so aggressive on Twitter. We actually talk to the guy. He's very agreeable. And
I know people get so pissed off at him because he's just he you know what he is? He's like the Jeremy Kauffman of the post-libertarians. You know what I mean? He's just very insane and aggressive, and doubles down and triples down and quadruples down and will do everything to trigger you on Twitter. But then you have him on your podcast, and he's just this nice, lovable guy who just got married and just found out he's gonna have a kid, and it's just Twitter's not real life. Go touch some grass or whatever.
I will say I'm pretty sure this is true because I read this from a priest about Aquinas, but the only person Aquinas quoted more than the Bible and Aristotle was Augustine. He quoted Augustine a lot, and so I think there's the philosophy kind of builds into each other. You know, it's but I don't know too much about Augustinian. I guess Augustinianism, I guess you would call it, instead of Thomism. But maybe Eincass can take more of that one.
Yeah, so in terms of the Augustine order, like my impression is that it's sort of been in decline. You know, it started 11th, 12th century, something like that. And again, like, you know, these things come into existence for some purpose. And I think the friars were a big part of the Augustinian order. But you know, as you know, maybe they address the issue that they needed to address, or society or the church sort of moves forward. These things can wax and wane depending on sort of what the needs of society are. So my impression is currently there's not a whole lot of Augustinians around. And beyond that, I know that I think they sort of started the idea of the friar was an Augustine idea. I've probably read a little bit more of St. Augustine than Caleb has. He's very good, very dense. The farther back you go, the sort of harder, like, you know, I would say it's very hard to read Aquinas anyways, because he's writing in a way that's, you know, it's 800 years old and it's very distinct from what we do now. And St. Augustine is like 800 years before that. So it's
right. Yeah.
excellent to read, but you have to sort of prepare yourself, and you have to sort of, you know, flex your brain a little bit beforehand and get it's a mental workout to get through his stuff. But it's, yeah, I think Aquinas certainly does a more thorough job in terms of the philosophy and the rigor, but I think there's a lot of value in St. Augustine, and very worth reading.
I posted a link to the private cell. I'll say the regular comments if you want. It's a link to the Augustine Institute YouTube channel. And so I think you might find that useful. I prefer the Mystic Institute, but they had some good lectures on the Augustine Institute as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was just curious. It's something I'm still looking into. So another thing we wanted to talk about. So, you know, kind of, I guess maybe both of you could give an answer to why are you Catholic? Just to be blunt, like,
because it's true.
Because it's true. Okay, and podcast. But you know what brought you to Catholicism? What about Catholicism do you find makes it, you know, that you? What about it do you find that convinces you that it's true, or that it's you know, the best for you, or whatever? Caleb, maybe start with you, and then we'll go to AC.
Okay. Well, one of the reasons I think it's true is, overall, I'm a Catholic, is one of the big things for me going into it was this emphasis on faith and reason as a way of knowing things. I think that's a beautiful way to go about life, is faith and reason. I came from a very fundamental Protestant church that was very young earth only, Kinham types, and so being a fan of science and evolution wasn't really great. Yeah, wasn't really great. But that led me to finding out, like, Bishop Barron, Aquinas, the Church's teaching of evolution, Jim Aiken, and that just kind of done rabbit hole of finding out, okay, and every not just about the beauty of it all, the structure of it all. You walk into a Catholic church, and everything has a symbol. Everything is symbolic. From the 13, I actually can't remember the card now, but the 13 things on the wall that depict Jesus walking from the cross to he was crucified, to the stained glass windows, to where the tabernacle is, where everything is placed. The Mass is a beautiful liturgy. The rosary. There's so much beauty in Catholicism that is helpful for everyday life, and their understanding of what prayer is and what church is for is, I think, much better. Help you get through life. I think some of the ways that you can use Catholicism and help you get through life is just so beneficial that it's great. Even if it wasn't true, just for the naturalistic benefits alone, I would say people should be Catholic, because it is true. You get everything that comes with that, and so that's one of my big reasons for going there and staying in there and being Catholic. Okay, AC.
So I'm going to disagree on the thing that Caleb said at the end, is that even if it wasn't true, you should believe it anyways. It's glib, it's a little trite, but the absolute answer is because it's true. The religion that you should follow, the beliefs you should have, are the ones that are true. Yeah. And there's this kind of idea, and I don't want to ruffle too many feathers, but like, you know, this church feels better, or I enjoy this more, this sort of resonates with me more. If your church is teaching something that you don't think is true, you shouldn't be part of that church. Like, ultimately, it should be about what you think is true.
So what makes Catholicism true and Protestantism or Orthodoxy not true?
Sure, and I mean, we can find some little fine detail things, but for the most part, it's this basis in reason. You know, like the Aquinas has these highest honors in the church, you know, as a doctor of the church. And it's because he sits there and bases things on reason. Caleb mentions this idea of faith and reason. They don't live in two separate worlds. We don't sit there and say, okay, well, here I can use reason to get to things, and here I can use faith to get to things, and somewhere in the middle, we have this nice, happy sort of lovey-dovey situation where everything works out. Faith is extremely important. Faith grows out of reason, right? If we think of, and the way we understand divine faith is by understanding human faith. That's the best analogy to it. If Caleb tells me something, should I believe him or not? Well, what do I know about Caleb? I base it on reason. Is okay. I know Caleb tends not to lie to me. Maybe he doesn't. He isn't. But he's got a trustworthy face. But there's some basis for reason. I can understand the words he's saying. I can understand that he exists as a person. There's my understanding of what really is, and from that I can say, okay, should I trust him? Should I not trust him? Like when Aquinas goes, one of the reasons it's important to him to try and prove the existence of God is, well, what should our divine faith be? Should our faith be, I believe that God exists, or should it be, I know God exists, and now I'm going to believe what he says, or I'm going to believe that what his son tells us, or I'm going to believe the things that are preached by his church. Because without reason, faith just becomes gullibility. Again, on the human level, that's certainly true. And you start running into a lot of issues. A lot of the criticisms, mostly naive criticisms, but you'll hear from atheists, is that they sort of have this idea of faith without reason, and if you do have faith without reason, you are just being gullible. There's a place for faith, and there's a place to, but it's to expand upon the things that you do know with certainty. And the Catholic Church realizes that, has articulated extremely well, and has, we talk about, there's the works of Augustine, the works of Aquinas, and it's not just them sort of saying, well, this is what I think might be true, or this is what this Bible passage says, or this is how I want to understand this. Is this and say, okay, do we know this is true? Yes. Okay, therefore we know this is true, right? Yes. Therefore we know this is true, right? Yes. Okay, now what does the Bible say about that? And it builds this coherent whole, but it has to be grounded in reason, because we're grounded in reason. Right, you mentioned earlier, Jacob, this idea that the Protestant tradition sort of starts with, okay, well, what does the Bible tell me? But even that, you need to have a basis in reason. You need to know what a book is. You need to know what an author is. You need to know what words mean. You need to understand, okay, that this is written about someone that did something. And for that, it's baby steps, but there's still a grounding there. It's not like the Bible, beams revelation into your head. It still has to build. If Jesus tells a parable, you need to know what a vineyard is. You need to know what grapes are. You need to know what a father and a son are. And the more firm that foundation can be, the more that your faith can grow.
To clarify, I wouldn't say that the entirety of the Reformed or Protestant tradition is would autistically or extremely pursue a hyper Bible first, but it is
sure.
It is something that exists. But there are plenty who would get people like William Lane Craig who would absolutely agree with and even I would agree with the high importance on reason and philosophy for how we there's different ways to read. When we're trying to translate the Bible, we need to be able to use logic to go back and study the translations and compare them to the original manuscripts and try to stay true to the original text. And then on top of that, we need to have a proper hermeneutic that makes sense of the Bible, because the Bible will the Bible interprets the Bible a lot of times, and so we have to read things with a proper understanding. So yeah, I'm completely with you on that.
And I probably present a little. I certainly present a little bit in caricature, but I just want to sort of hammer home that point that, like we said, you have to start with the reason, and then the faith can grow from that. And again, I think the Catholic Church has done the most exquisite job of doing that and of being right. Again, there's a long tradition of saying a lot of very true things.
Now, what about when Jesus says, unless you come to me like a child, you will not inherit the kingdom of God. So, some people say we should have a childlike faith. Is that a misunderstanding, or is there something there that's compatible with having a faith that is grounded in reason and not gullible? Because I hear what you're saying, but I also part of me thinks that faith can be reasonable, but then I also what I talk about is that I also make a differentiation between faith and knowledge. And I have faith that God exists. I have faith in the claims of the Bible. But if I were to state the things in the Bible that I believe in, and then say, instead of that I believe in them, that I know they are true, well, I've kind of distorted the word faith to just be the same as knowledge. And to me, if I'm going to use my reason and logic, I think that those words probably have different meanings and connotations. So, but I don't know. Those are my thoughts. What would you say to that?
Sure, and Caleb, please, if you want to jump in, I want to give you don't want to because I've got lots to say here, but I want to make sure.
I am
get a word in.
exhausted from work today.
Okay, that's
go
fine.
ahead and take some lead.
Sure. So one, I think that distinction is very important, and I think people, even outside of theological context, people don't understand that there's some things they believe and there's some things that they know, and they don't know the difference between the two of them. And I'm going to take a bit of a tangent here, but I'm going to go off this. Is some very obvious physical question: does the Earth go around the sun, or does the sun go around the Earth? And do you believe that, or do you know it? And I will say I certainly believe that the Earth goes around the sun.
Mm-hmm.
How would I prove that to you? How do I know that from direct evidence? And how much of it is faith that I've placed in other people telling me that that's true? And everyone think, okay, I know that, but you don't. You believe it. It turns out to be true, and there's a process that you can go through and observe parallax and all these kinds of things. But we forget that distinction. Is there's things that we believe that we think we know, and there's things that we know that we think we believe, and it's really important to sort of separate those two things in any context.
Okay, but like so that's sort of a example that talks about something that we can only indirectly test and measure. What about the things we can directly test and measure? So, like, for example, I mean, we're talking to each other right now, and I would say we would probably agree that we know that we are talking to each other right now.
Sure.
Or like if you stub your toe, I mean, as long as we're going to reject solipsism and agree that solipsism is stupid. So, but leaving that off the table, it's like, when you stub your toe, when you're talking to somebody. So, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and so I'll make sure I'm not rejecting the idea of knowledge. Like I could go through and I could do the things to make it rigorously true to me that the Earth goes around the sun. And I actually have some idea how I do that. I think a lot of people
right. Even then, though, I think that like the way we would test those is like there's a difference between knowledge we know through inference of indirect observation and tests versus things that we directly observe through.
Sure, and that's the action of the reason, right? That's intellectual knowledge versus sensorial knowledge.
This kind of gets into actually Ayn Rand and objectivism a little bit, which
probably
we'll
a little bit.
Into.
Yeah. And sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but yeah, like my knowledge and the things that I believe are distinct things, and it's important I tell the difference between those two things. To your example of our faith should be childlike, I think that's a correct understanding and a correct interpretation. I will say I've got a 2-year-old running around my house. Fortunately, I think he's finally fallen asleep. He was banging the walls right when we started. I was worried he was going to make too much noise. And he has incredible faith in me that he will surprise trust fall me at the worst possible times, and I will catch him.
2-year-olds are great that way.
He's fantastic.
I have one myself.
And it's a childlike faith, but it's not, he's not going to do that with a stranger. He's not going to walk up to a stranger and say he's going to catch me. He knows something about me. He doesn't. It's not very clear in his mind. But that's daddy. He can do anything. He's going to take care of me.
Okay. So the childlike nature of the faith is in the trust aspect of that faith more so than the lack of reason.
Yeah, I mean, and there's things that he's I don't know how daddy's going to do this, but daddy's going to do it. I don't know if he's caught me every time he's going to catch me. But the point is, it's not naivete. It's not purely like I have no basis for thinking daddy's going to catch me when I decide I'm going to walk in this terrible place. It's like, nope, that daddy looks after me. I don't know. And the childlikeness comes from, I don't need to know how it's going to work. I don't need to understand everything about what God can do or how I can do it. I know he's there. I know he's powerful, and I know he loves me, and that can be enough. But I know those things, and then the faith comes from everything else.
A good analogy I've heard. Now, this analogy is weird for me to use because I work on cars for a living, so I actually know how they work. But for most people who don't have the kind of knowledge that I have on how cars work, they have faith that when they turn their key, their car will turn on, and that will get them from point A to point B. But they don't really know the exact mechanisms that make their car work. I mean, like they have a very rudimentary understanding.
Magic that the key's connected to a wire that connects to hamsters running in the front.
Right. Yeah.
That's not how that works.
No, but at the same time, they have good reason for having faith that the car will work because like it's done it before and they see other people doing it. And so, it's a kind of a crude metaphor, but that's sort of how I justify my faith in God is that like, well, it works. Like when I follow what the Bible says, when I pray to God, when I lean into what the Holy Spirit is putting on my heart, things go well for me, and when I don't, things don't go well for me. And I think that's also true when we look at history and society. When people stray from God, things go badly. When people follow God, things generally go well. And some of the best developments in our society, I think, have largely been influenced by Christians, largely Catholicism. So I mean, I read Tom Wood's How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization. So I'm definitely aware of a lot of the claims and the historical realities that that Tom brings up in that book. So, but yeah, I think so. It sounds like we're kind of in agreement there. I was just curious if there was any, if there'd be any differentiation or not between the way we look at those subjects.
And I think your analogy is an excellent one, because even beyond that, people trust certain car variety. I know this Toyota is not going to break down. I know this,
Sure, yeah,
whatever else, and they have no idea why, but that's their experience, and they don't need to know why. It's enough. Okay, I know my mechanic can fix this. I know he's done good work in the past, and I don't need to understand that. And that's not to say that there's still value in having that understanding. The church wants to build that understanding, but the things we don't know, or that we only know through revelation, or that we understand through belief, that can be enough. And if we can backfill in the things that we can learn from that, wonderful.
Well, and even my knowledge isn't exhaustive. Like, I'm not an engineer, so I don't understand the car as much as the engineer would, as far as like, okay, well, like I know these things interact with these things to create this effect, but the engineer's like, okay, well, we engineered this to withstand this sort of pressure and the mathematical calculations involved and all that. So so there's certainly, and I think with our faith, we can certainly, through philosophy and good theology, get a closer and closer understanding of the truth. But there's a lot of things there are some things that I think are the best we get is sort of a like Paul said, we're looking through a kind of a foggy mirror, trying to make a best approximation of it.
Absolutely, I think that's spot on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see, next subject. I'll save. I want to get into political theory, but a little bit more. But maybe let's save that for the end. I want to. How does Ayn Rand fit into all this?
Well, she converted to Catholicism before she died, and she became a Thomist. I mean,
I keep saying this. She converted. We don't know exactly when it was relative to her death.
yeah, she clearly converted. I mean, look, the photo has a cross in it. She obviously converted.
No, so we I think it was in one of our first roundtables, kind of ripped off an Ayn Rand quote, and she had a fantastic but very egotistical quote about the only philosophers worth reading are the three A's: Aristotle, Aquinas, and Ayn Rand. And we decided that what it actually should be is the only people worth reading are Aristotle, Aquinas, and the Austrians. But yeah, there was I'm gonna plug our stuff here, but Caleb and I, along with Bulgakov, had a gold guy who've also mentioned. We did a roundtable last week, going through Virtue of Selfishness by Ayn Rand, and spent several hours sort of going over a lot of her philosophy and how it relates. And despite it being a couple of Catholics and a kind of half ex-objectivist, I'm not sure where Gold Guy actually ended up, but we were like, wow, this is really good stuff.
Yeah.
So I think, one, again, if someone that had that much respect for Aristotle and Aquinas in the 20th century is worth sort of being aware of, because for the most part, until pretty recently, Thomism kind of disappeared from the modern world. So a lot of that knowledge people didn't talk about it. People didn't think in those terms. People were just doing a lot of really dumb philosophy. And we see the consequences of a lot of that right now. And even though I think she missed on a lot of things, she clearly had a deep appreciation for those fundamentals that Aquinas and Aristotle put together, and expresses it in a way that modern readers can really can understand and resonate with. And she writes very persuasively. She also, as Caleb I think has pointed out in other places, her critiques, the things that she understands that are wrong with the modern world, are so penetrating and insightful and just devastating. That I think that we sort of ignore her at our own peril.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ayn Rand was great because everything she went against was wrong, and she went against it correctly. But because of her atheism, she didn't have any viable solutions to offer. So we're just left with an old woman yelling at people for why they're stupid. And she's right; they are stupid, and she's right. But she was not right all the time. Because of that, we have to read her and be like, okay, like I could quote if I was arguing with somebody who was like a moral relativist, secularist, materialist, I could quote a lot of Rand, and it'd be completely viable and would work. But because of atheism, I can't be an objectivist. There's too many other problems with it. But was bringing out the best parts of her into best parts of what he said. I put this. All the best things he said could be said by a Thomist and be just as like reasonable. Like, I don't think there's anything he said that was anything good he said was so reasonable that it's hard to disagree with it because it's for reason let her.
Yeah, well, she was fantastic in, like, you know, whenever she did those TV interviews, excuse me, those TV interviews, and people would question her view on like why she wasn't like a big fan of like this hyper Americanized patriotism and like I remember the one we were asking her like, but you surely you must believe in the collective good and doing what's right for the entire country. And she's just like in her own words like no, like F that's gay. Like the only thing that's real is individual rights, and the government should only exist to protect individual rights. And it's like just how clearly and confidently she would push back against like that and also remember watching those interviews. I was surprised to the extent that even back then, like a lot of these silly like hyper nationalist socialist ideas were even taking root in popular culture back then. Sometimes I think we look at the past with a bit more rose-colored glasses and think like, oh, it wasn't as bad as it was today. But a lot of the stuff that's bad about today has been there for a while. It just, maybe it's gotten worse, but it's not like it was, it's kind of always been there, I think, to a certain extent. So I definitely appreciate objectivism. Although what I like to say, and this is kind of true of a lot of different ideologies, it's like I love objectivism. I'm not always a fan of objectivists.
I was about to say the same thing. Love objectivism, can't stand objectivists. There was I argued with one recently. Kevin Burns. He's in charge of like an objectivist political party in I think it was either Ireland, Scotland, or some Euro-trash country. I had him on a podcast, very friendly guy, but we started talking, is God real? And what is the better starting point of like atheism or agnosticism? And it was just some of the dumbest things I heard. Like his argument was existence is everything that exists, and God doesn't exist, therefore we cannot be involved in existence.
Well, that's begging the question.
Exactly. No, it's not, because you don't know what existence means. Obviously, Jacob. I mean, come on. That was his argument, and it was so bad. But this is a relatively smart guy who, because of his Randianism, he's just boxed himself into like, oh, if Wednesday was bad, it has to be bad. So I won't even read why it's bad.
I mean, I think like I love the idea of like we start with our senses. I was just on Jose Gallison's show earlier this week. He hasn't released it yet, but that's what he said. I got to start with my senses, and I was like, well, I mean, I think I do too. It's just my senses tell me that like there's something. There's a ghost in the machine. You know what I mean? Like I have too many experiences and observations through my senses that there's more to reality than just the physical reality. Like it's not just atoms and cells and electrons and chemical reactions and stardust. Like there's more to like we're having conversations right now, and like I'm sensing a person. I'm not sensing a clump of atoms. I'm sensing a person, and I'm sensing
their demon in your mind that is just projecting false realities to you.
I don't know about that, but there's some people that I've interacted with that I go, I'm sensing something from you, like a spirit, but it is not a good spirit.
I've talked to some NPCs recently, and all I wanted to tell them was hey man, Control Alt Delete.
So I don't know how deep we want to dive into the epistemology here, but I think you make a good point, Jacob. But I'm gonna push back because I just got to do it. You don't sense people. You don't sense that Caleb's a person. You don't sense that I'm a person. You sense loud, quiet, high pitch, low pitch, fuzzy, soft, white, black, gray, whatever. And then your reason acts on those senses, and you realize, yep, that's a person there. is you don't have a sense that detects, and it's a fine distinction because it's and even beyond like the experiences that you're having, we can realize there's something beyond just the atoms and stuff just by knowing that you're a knower, knowing that you are somebody that can sense things. Right? That's sort of and it's a subtle point. I'm not trying to contradict, but it's a subtle point. But
I get you. You're kind of clarifying or adding to what I said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is we sense things.
Yeah,
we know things. Then we notice, hey, there's somebody there that knew a thing. That must be me. So and that is already different from atoms. Is knowers don't make sense as in part of just the physical, because knowing is an immaterial thing. That's happening in my mind, whatever that is, and that's not a physical location.
No, my co-worker and best friend in real life is a materialist, and so we argued about the immateriality of the brain, and his end argument was any theory you put forward about being immaterial part of the mind is just your chemicals in your brain trying to cope with the fact that you are a finite life form. That was the basic argument.
How can the chemicals in my mind have a free will of their own to decide
how can they think? It doesn't it doesn't track at all. He's a relatively smart guy when it comes to things that aren't. He's boxed in. He's very boxed into his little box, and he won't accept anything outside that box. But also, religious people have their own box that he says everyone is putting stuck in a box, and I'm working on it.
Yeah, no, I mean the problem is and this is why you need faith and reason, because there's a problem with like the hyper rationalist, and then there's a problem with the I don't know a good label for them, the people that just completely reject philosophy and faith and reason. Rob,
I think Aquinas called it fideism. There's not really a good ist for it because fideist doesn't sound right, but I think Aquinas called it fideism. Am I pronouncing it right? I can't remember what he called it.
Yeah, I think it's fideism.
Yeah,
it's
fideism.
Yeah, it's a good to know there's a label for it, but so I think I agree. I mean it's a little bit of a funny pairing, but I agree that there's a lot that Christians can and libertarians obviously can learn from Ayn Rand and her works. Although I'm not a fan of her fiction. I found her fiction to be a little.
The Fountainhead is really good. Anything else is not.
I haven't read that. I tried to read Atlas Shrugged and was just like, this is stupid. Maybe I'll give the Fountainhead a try. But I'm also not a big fiction fan anymore, to be honest. But I don't know.
You gotta give Flannery O'Connor a try. You gotta read some Flannery O'Connor. That is peak, my opinion, peak fiction. Peak fiction. Yeah. I always get fiction and non-fiction confused.
Well, real quick, last thing on Ayn Rand. One, definitely like getting into something like Atlas Shrugged. Like you have to sort of, it's a marathon. Like you have to sort of prepare yourself for it. I was surprised when we went through both herself. Like her essays are surprisingly good. And I'll say, talking about her criticisms, I think even one of the things I think she's most insightful on, even though we sort of fundamentally disagree with part of it, her criticism of mysticism, I think is excellent. And it goes back to what we're talking about, is if with faith and reason, there's an issue. I think it's unfortunately rather prevalent in a lot of Christianity, even in Catholicism, is that a lot of Christians do kind of believe in the flying spaghetti monster, and they don't really realize that that's what their faith has led them to. And again, that's not what the Catholic Church teaches. I don't think that's any of us, or we sort of understand enough to be beyond that.
Divine simplicity supremacy over here. Okay,
right. It's important to understand that that you can sort of fall subject to this. It's like, well, I believe things, and that's enough for me, because then you end up just you end up doing things that don't make a whole lot of sense, and if you don't have that grounding in reason, you do things you don't understand. Moral theory. I think something that Rand does an incredible good job of in her objectivist ethic essay is, okay, what should a moral theory be? How do we build a moral theory? And goes through the steps of, okay, what do I know? What is a man? What do men do? What is good for men? And that's where a moral theory comes from. And she kind of gets her conclusions wrong at the end because she doesn't really quite understand what a man is. But she gets close enough, and she understands the basics. Okay, how should we think about things? So I think it's excellently done. And even some of the things she says about morality or theism, she does a pretty good job of understanding some of the issues and the pitfalls.
Yeah. Sure. Her understanding of morality is she gets lesser goods and what goods are, and she gets there's a lot to love about her morality when it's right.
Yeah, I feel like the problem with Rand and other objectivists is that they don't. This is something that, like, this is kind of a Jordan Peterson argument. Like, they don't realize for society to function and for morality to be properly grounded, there has to be some sort of like metaphysical substrate and sort of and inevitably humans develop a sort of religious ethos to operate through. Christianity's the best. You take that out, well, they're not going to just derive something that's pure reason. They're going to, what's the left doing right now? They're creating their own religion that's, born out of, I don't know. At best, it's born out of some weird amalgamation of post-structuralism and Marxism. At worst, I would say it's just, it's fucking demonic, but it's probably
more
both.
like that one. I think Marxism is demonic, so I think it's all up together here. No, see, actually, we didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about that. We didn't get to talk about this on the roundtable, sadly, because we ran out of time. But I want to talk about her. She had a quote about psychologists who love religion but aren't religious, who just claim it is good for society. I can't remember the quote, but she despised. Like, she wasn't talking about. You could tell she was talking about Carl Jung, but she never said it by name. But she was clearly talking about the idea of someone who's like Jordan Peterson type, who says, "Well, there's value in religion, so we should believe it is true for the value of it being true." And I guess I actually agree with some of her critique on it. I think you shouldn't believe it's a true thing because of the value it gives you, believe because it's true.
No, but I think it's actually more that you believe in it because the value it brings to, not the value it brings to society, even the fact that society works with it and falls apart without it speaks to there's something true about it on a level that, like, is encoded. If the truth of a belief is basically encoded in our evolutionary biology, essentially, then there's probably something to that, which is kind of what Jordan Peterson says. He's like, this is.
I can't remember the quote, but you would love it. The quote from Saint Augustine on how God's law is written on the hearts of men, and it's talking about how every man has an interest in natural law and a teleology towards God, kind of saying. Like, I can't remember the quote, but I remember reading it and just thinking, this is amazing. He's got it. He gets it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's a good sort of deeper truth there, like you were saying. Like if and Rand realizes this, but if our highest power is our reason, is our knowing, we're made for truth. We're made to know true things and find out true things. And so if we believe true things, it's going to be more resonant with our being, and we're going to thrive more. So like you said, you see societies that have true beliefs, even if it doesn't seem like it should directly impact how well they do or how well they thrive. Christian societies do better because they are somehow they have there's something more true about the way they live their lives. And it's not exactly the same thing as this sort of Peterson point. It's like, well, maybe it's not true, but it seems to work. It works because it's true to some extent.
Right. Like, it's one thing if it was like, oh, it kind of works. Like, no, like if it works to the degree that Christianity works in society, then both on an individual and a collective level, it's like, well, it's not just a oh, that just happens to work and there's no deeper reason behind that. Like, it's just, that's kind of like, it'd be like if humans accidentally discovered that electrons flow through like copper and gold wiring, but never took the time to think like, there might be a reason why we use these copper, coils, and then they power these machines and stuff. Like, I don't know why it does. It's weird, but there's probably no deeper reason for it. It's just some kind of weird magic. It's like, no, it's like, why would you assume that there are reasons behind scientific truths, but not think there's reasons behind psychological and sort of like these societal historical truths that we see? It's just people. I think it's just people kind of intentionally avoiding answering that question because deep down they know the answer. I would say, and they're just living in denial. But we could do that for another hour. But what I want to focus on for the last 20, 30 minutes would be the political philosophy, because that's where I feel like that'll be a little bit interesting. I know Caleb's kind of been going on a bit of a roller coaster over the last 6 months with his political beliefs. I'm assuming from your name, AC, that you are an anarchist such as myself. So I don't want to make this into a debate, but you know, I'm anticipating some disagreement between the two of you. So
I
AC,
think you and Ancast might be more aligned than me than Ancast and myself. Okay, I could be wrong on that, but I think you guys might agree more than Ancast and I would.
well, we'll see. But let's start with AC. Based on your Catholic and Thomist beliefs, what do you think? Catholicism, the Bible, Christianity. How do you derive your political beliefs, and what are those?
Sure, and I'm going to go back a little bit when we were sort of first talking about this idea of Austro-Thomism, and as it sort of just took two different ideas that we liked and sort of stuck them together. And I think that's that can work in the short term, but ideally you want to have a coherent philosophy. Like we talked about, the world is coherent, the world works the way it does. So if somehow Thomism or Catholicism and anarchism were at odds with one another, if turns out they're not compatible, I need to drop one of them. I'm living a disordered life. I'm effectively in sin. Not in sin, because I might not be aware of it, but I'm doing something that's bad for me by having this inconsistency. So as best I can figure it, I think they do agree with one another. And something that I really want to try and work on more. And I think, again, Rand sort of starts on this path a little bit because she's starting from reason, but it sort of is deriving some kind of anarchist ethic or moral theory from those first principles. From what I've read, understanding, all the greats that all of us are pretty familiar with, looking at Lockean homesteading, understanding the ideas of the non-aggression principle, which is, as best I can tell, seems to be pretty well in line with a lot of Catholic teaching and a lot of just this fundamental moral philosophy. Okay, what's good for a man? If I have a free will, what's the purpose of my free will? Is it, and if it's a part of me, if it's an important, essential part of man to have a free will, then acting or acting in against the free will of another man would be immoral in that case. So best I can tell, that sort of nice libertarian tradition of, initiating violence is immoral. That's something that I think I want to try and, at least for myself, try and make this more grounded. But I think one of my big projects is saying, making a very clear connection to, the NAP is something that is just derivable from Catholic teaching, from first principles, from Aristotelianism, from Thomism. And that's about as far as I go, as I understand, there's a lot of things, the NAP is a pretty clear prescription on, these are things you can do, these things you can't do. And it's not all encompassing. There's certainly a lot of things that are immoral that have nothing to do with the non-aggression principle, but at least as far as a first principle of social interaction, to me, it seems like it's pretty morally correct. And everything else from there is sort of application. As we can have some different ideas about the best way to sort of apply this, or the pragmatism things. And I think there's a lot of interesting ideas. Most of the people I end up talking to sort of in this post-libertarian camp and want to utilize a lot of force in a lot of ways. I'm like, is that moral? Maybe. And it's a hard line to walk, but philosophically, it seems like if I want to do moral things, something like an anarchist ethic is the moral one, and I have trouble seeing outside of that.
Well, to use their own arguments against them, I see Andrew, Popular Liberty, a lot of time using the line when he's debating Ace and others, like things breaking causality. And to me, it's like, okay, well, if we're talking about breaking causality, how do you derive a good from a bad? It's like, if we're going to take immoral means and forceful means, and then somehow we're going to use evil and force to come to peace and liberty, it's like, I think that is a huge break in causality to me. But at the same time, I do recognize that there is, to be fair, it is sort of hard to, I'm as anarchist as they come, but I do recognize that there is a fine line to walk between political realism and principles. I just that's a lot of what my conversation with Kyle the other night was. I don't know if you caught that, Caleb, yet or not. But we kind of, after we kind of talked about borders for half of it, but then the second half was sort of like, trying to find that fine line, because you don't want to do the peak known as criticism of living in Ancapistan in your head, because you're just useless at that point. But I think there's also, there's an equal opposite error to make on the other side, and really what you're trying to do is kind of find a balance between, pushing your principles into reality, being effective without crossing certain lines. But so I can appreciate what you're saying there.
And I'll
AC.
jump in real quick. You mentioned at the beginning the sort of the ends justifying the means idea, and that's something that is drivable from principle. And I think Aquinas did it. Somebody that's very clear in Catholic theology: is the ends don't justify the means.
Yeah.
Is evil means are not permissible because you're not God and you can't anticipate what the ends are going to be.
Right. Yeah. God can absolutely work amazing good from the both accidental and intentional evil of men, but that is because God is God, and we cannot do. And also, when God does that, it doesn't make the evil less evil, and the people that do the evil still face punishment for their evil. It's just he works good out of it because he's
that as far as I'm concerned is unequivocal. Is the ends are not justifying the means. Is you can't sit there and say, well, I shouldn't do this, but I like the results. You are sinning. You are doing things you should not.
You can't commit more evil than you're trying to prevent. That's the thing.
That's I mean, you should not commit evil that good should come from it. That is morally
you can't do that.
Not allowed.
That's the kind of the sin of the original sin, right? In the garden is kind of like man saying that we can go it on our own, and we can we can control things, we can be sovereign over ourselves, and that's that only God, like the whole the kind of the idea of like the tree of the knowledge of good or evil. It's just like we were in a sense, when Eve took the apple and ate it and Adam ate it, it was like us saying, well, we can define good and evil, and we can be the arbiters of it, and that's not possible.
I would say that it was a lie of egalitarianism. Say the snake said, "Eat this and you be like God, and you're no good."
Right.
It was a lie. It was a lie of egalitarianism. It was actually, that's the logical point I get from a lot of Marxists who dedicate their books to Satan, which is this. I made it as a joke, and people told me no, Marxists actually dedicate their books to Satan because of this. And I'm like, I mean, they're not wrong theologically, I don't think, but it's kind of weird to see that parallel.
Yeah. All right. So Caleb, you 100% agree that anarchy is the way, and the podcast is over, right?
Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree. Yeah. I'm the violent kind of anarchist. So,
oh, you're an ancom.
We're talking about throwing Molotov cocktails that left us, right? That's what we're talking about.
I was joking about the communists in the chat earlier, Caleb.
Yeah, me too, man. Totally. I'm not. There's not a communism flag behind my poster over there. No,
Fakirtarian said they were going to send Antifa to attack my house. I guess you're going to drive up from Florida to do that.
I mean, I would love to come and visit. Also,
yes. If Caleb ever asks you where you live and says he wants to come hang out, do not tell him.
I'm a Fed, y'all. I'm just straight Fed right now. No, I don't. How do I put this? Politically speaking, I don't want to say anything hard. How to put this? Not hard.
Be harsh. Be cruel.
No, I don't want to say anything definite right now, because I am still learning and going along the route and seeing how far I can go before saying, okay, I've lost principle. Okay, this next step would be no more principle. Trying to see where is the line. How far can I push the line to be still within principle and still actually make effective change. And so, I don't want to say anything like definite on my politics all, because they're still learning. I will say monarchists, I think, is very in line with Catholicism. I think covenant communities would be how I do. I mean, my political system would be a Yarvinian patchwork style system. But it's like, how do we get there? Is it going to happen? Is it going to happen naturally? How much you have to push it? Is pushing is how to put this? The ministry of truth thing from earlier, kind of common. There's left creates a system of left creates a system of government, or what's the word I'm looking for? A new department, a ministry of truth. If they create that, so the right, when they get in power, dissolve it or use it against the left in the same way the left uses against them. I would argue that's already in existence. It's to be used justly, not targeted, but it's to be used justly for. Okay, well, you don't have a right to lie. I would make that a saying, and this is property.
Are there any things that, if created into existence, cannot be, like, there is no just use for? I mean, if I'm trying to think of something. If there was some sort of virus that
I mean,
only.
there's no just use for the abortion technology. I mean, there's no way to. I mean,
Yeah, I guess that'd be a good
analogy work,
example. Yeah, but I mean, I guess my point is like I don't know. I can't think of a good metaphor or comparison off the top of my head, but my intuition is that things that exist in nature, things that God created, always have a just use, but things that man create, sometimes you can find a just use for them, and sometimes you can't. Like sometimes there are things that are just like there is no good use for this. The only just response is to abolish it, or in the
Nuclear
meantime
weapons,
to refuse to refuse to partake in it.
Yeah, I agree. But it's more of a question of how I put it. I'm trying to be very careful with my words here because I don't want to say something that I don't agree with, but I also don't know 100% what I believe yet. That's how I put this.
Well, do you believe that it is moral to initiate force against somebody who is not who is not initiating violence or force against anyone else?
Would we consider lying and deliberately misleading people on falsehoods that could cause harm, violence? Because I could make an argument that lying someone into harming themselves is violent. Lying someone into believing a falsehood, like leading someone down a path that has lies and falsehood, is harmful. And so I can make an argument.
agree.
So if that is the case, is that certain things you can say, okay, this is factually untrue, this is a lie. You don't have a right to spread harmful lies to people. So there could be an argument for the left is spreading harmful lies about election misinformation or COVID vaccines or anything like that. They are using to actually harming people. You could make an argument that it is a just use of that power to cross that down. It makes okay, you cannot lie people into harming themselves. I think you can make an argument for that being a completely fail. But it is like we're using state power. What's law state power is immoral, but I don't think all state power is inherently. It's a tool that can be used for good and used for bad. The tool has been used for bad a lot, but I don't think it. How I put this: a law state power is inherently evil because it's built wrong. But if it's built and already has funds for it, and you can't give the funds back. It's like okay, we have this gun, we can't dismantle. Let's use it for good. I think I'm a fair argument for that. It's not the ring of power.
We could
go Lord of the Rings reference, but
we could go round and round on the political strategy debate, but that's not the purpose of tonight, and I'm too tired to do that at the moment. but I guess what I want to get at is like let's make a differentiation between political strategy and the political ends that we're trying to achieve. So if we're going to leave strategy off the table, what are the ends that you are trying to achieve?
I want Amazon and the Catholic Church to run the entire world. No, I don't want that. So I'm a big believer in that.
I want Elon Musk to run the entire world.
Yes.
SpaceX and the Catholic Church.
We need
We'll give the space pope. I love it.
Yes. I would joke that if I would become a priest, I want to become the priest that's on Mars and become the first bishop of Mars. That's I'm a big believer in like localism and you should in federalism, honestly. Like you should build a local government that is your shared ideology. You shouldn't have the problem with democracy is you're forced to live and deal with the consequences of people you can't stand you. So I'm all for localism. So whatever gets you to the point where if my local government could just be a Catholic monarch, I would want that. How do we get to that point? That's the issue. But locally, what I would want is a company town with a Catholic church that is involved.
But is this monarch somebody who can rule over people who haven't consented to that monarch's rule?
I would say that would be bad. I would say you need like an HOA kind of thing. You buy into it, like a covenant explains.
Right.
Or Yalvin spells out a great system in Pat's work that I think should be. If you're going to be into politics today, you kind of need to have read some Yalvin because I think so much of what he's done has been so influential that you need to understand a lot of Yalvin to kind of understand a lot of.
So basically, your ideas are the same as Andrew's, essentially.
Andrew and I are in almost 99% agreement. There's a few things he says I want to push back on, but I know he's right. I just don't. He said something today in a group chat. I'm like, I know you're right, but I feel gross agreeing with this. And that's how Andrew makes me feel sometimes when we're talking. I'm like, you're right.
But the thing is, like, I feel like what you. So I mean, like, when I describe my beliefs, Andrew goes like, "Oh, well, that's essentially monarchy," and then Andrew describes his beliefs to me, and I go, "Well, that's essentially anarchy." It's like we're so it's just like, but it's like what I think at the end of the day, the way I define these terms are what are the relationships of men to their fellow men, and the relationships are essentially anarchical, not you know what I mean. So I think what we're striving for is a society where men are not ruling over other men, but rather we want, property rights, voluntary associations, and the ability to opt out, I guess, and have that localism, have that decentralization. And to me, that's, I think anarchism describes that better than monarchism, but, I, I guess that's a
The problem
difference
with
of
these terms is that
semantical.
the problem with both these terms is they are used by so many people who people say I tell you guys are anarchists, he thought I was a communist. Tell you guys you're a monarchist, you think you're a global monarchist. It's like these
Yeah, but
problems
there's
with terms
people,
are
you could
always-
say you're a Catholic and people will think that means that like you're some kind of, pedo.
Exactly. I'm not a public school teacher. Come on. But that's the problem. With a lot of these political terms are so old that they have been used by so many different groups of people, which is why you really have to start adding like corporate monarch or Yarvinian monarch or Catholic monarch. You have to start adding prefixes to your terms like anarcho-capitalist. You have to start adding things to it to actually make it specific.
How about you say anarcho-monarchist? Just split the baby in half, okay? Just do both.
I think that's pretty reasonable. And I'll add to, I think one of the things that gets confused here, or that I think people get messed up with these terms, and what you hear from a lot of anarchists, and Jacob managed this idea of no one rules over anyone, is this idea of authority. And a lot of anarchists will just be, or I guess the sort of caricature of anarchism is that there's this rejection of authority at all. That you don't and I don't think you believe this. I certainly don't believe this. But that you don't submit to any kind of authority. There are no legitimate authorities, and I think
I'm a boss.
Yeah, exactly.
No, there's such a thing as legitimate authority. But I think,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
but I think that's where the character of anarchy is that you lose this, because I can imagine, like you said, you could have such thing as an anarcho monarchy. You could have an anarcho feudalism if you wanted to, but it comes down to voluntarism and what is a legitimate authority, and I think that comes from two sources. Is one, the family is, the father is legitimate authority over his family. The parents are legitimate authorities over their children. And from voluntarism is I can choose to submit to a given authority. And I think that's still consistent with anarchism because it's a voluntary relationship. And that, I have a hard time seeing how that would work in anything that would sort of look like a classical monarchy. But you can certainly have, a landlord. You could have like a feudal lord and say, okay, yeah, if you want to work on my property, you can work on my property. Here's the rules that we're going to go by. And you end up with these sort of Hoppian style covenant communities. But it's still voluntary. It's still based on those fundamental principles of what are licit interactions among men. Yeah,
my entire system be summed up as all exit, no voice. I think if you don't like something, you should leave to where you do like something, and you shouldn't get to have voice your opinion that destroys what people do like that is in the area. Like this is the type of democracy that there are some majority rule is like a fact of reality. That if you're in a system, it's like it's 100 people in a city and they all like this one guy as a king, and you don't, you shouldn't get to disrupt everything. You should just leave. That's my view on it. It's all exit, no voice. You shouldn't be able to disrupt the flow of majority of people in the land if the location. Now, if it's evil, you should leave as well because you shouldn't be a part of something that is evil. But it's
okay. So that was what I was. I try not to get too autistic on Twitter and debate you on things because I feel like 90% of the time it's just you're like Andrew being edgy, and I feel like at the end of the day,
I'm just bad at it. So it's
well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like I tell Andrew, it's like, listen, we have different takes on how to get to the destination we want to get to, which I don't even think is a bad thing. I kind of feel like we need, I mean, if the end goal is going to be decentralization, which means that different regions will govern themselves differently, then only stands to reason that, likely the road to get there is going to come from people doing different things. And so I try not to, people want to do their own thing to get to a more decentralized, privatized societies. Like, you do that, I'll do my thing, and hopefully we both make it to the other side and can trade with each other. That's the ideal society that we want to live in. So I mean, and we can debate over the labels all day, but if the end goal is essentially the same, then I don't know.
I think there's so much autistic screeching over the different labels that we use. Yeah. But I'll bring up your point to decentralization is there's this beautiful idea in Catholicism called subsidiarity. And it's this idea that the decisions get made by the most localized competent authority. So the decision, like, the family makes its decisions to start with. Any decisions the family can handle, the family handles. If it needs some higher authority, you go to the local parish or whatever, and it can all the way up. And I think sort of the anarchic angle to that would be that there are very, 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 very few things that can't be decided at the most local level, which would be the family or the individual. There's not if you really understand what a competent authority is and what decisions can be made and the spontaneous order of the market, subsidiarity tells you that all decisions can be made at the most local level, which is the individual or the family.
Yeah, Lutherans have a similar thing, the Magdeburg Confession of Faith, which in there they go into like the idea of the sovereignty of the most local magistrate. Reformers have their own thing called sphere sovereignty, and a lot of these ideas are kind of like they echo each other. And so yeah, I agree with that. Essentially, it's all decentralized. Living is biblical. I think property rights and Austrian economics are biblical. I released an episode earlier today, actually, where I'm actually doing a series now where I'm going into different parts of scripture that kind of go into kind of like that teach and demonstrate Austrian economic theory within the passage. Like I did Matthew 20 today, which is like the parable of the workers in the vineyards, and how at the beginning of the day there was the worker. He hired some workers and he offered them 1 denarius to work in the vineyard, and then like throughout the day he keeps on adding more people later and later into the day, including like at like the 11th hour he adds some people and they work 1 hour, and then when he goes to pay them all, he pays them all 1 denarius. And the people who started working at the beginning of the day are like, well, what the heck? We worked longer. We deserve more. And he's like, no, it's my property. Do with it whatever I want. Like, you agreed to 1 denarius, and that's what you're going to get. And the other people, I can give them more if I want to be generous. And who are you to tell me otherwise? And I just thought, like, well, that's so that debunks labor theory of value, because you don't automatically earn more money just for working longer hours or doing more work. So value doesn't come from necessarily just from doing more work. And B, it's like, the idea that with your property you can do what you please. And then 3, actual value comes from the subjective agreement made between 2 or more parties, 2 or more people. So it's
that's fantastic.
This kind of
I never really thought about that passage in that way, but you're exactly right. Like there's an endorsement of the concept of private property, that you can do what you want with it, that there's free exchange, and that's beautiful. I'm gonna have to listen to that episode.
It seems to get into what was it called? Just price. Is it called just price too? I can't remember. Is it a term a lot of Catholics had this view was for economics class was just price theory. Things that cost a just price, whether that just price is worse. And a lot of later Catholics I think that's you have to create a system that you can value things. It was a market labor theory of value, but the just price, they said, is really whatever 2 people agreed to pay for the work is the just price. And so I have a question for you real quick. And Catholicism usury is a sin. Did Protestantism, like, is that across the board against usury and like that kind of stuff is a sin as well? Because I didn't hear that word till I was Catholic, and so I never.
What is usury again? Refresh my memory.
Fundamentally, it's loaning at interest, but I think the modern usage is loaning it is loan sharking essentially.
Oh yeah. Well, I think Protestants in general would say that there's reasonable interest and then there's predatory interest, and yeah, there's
okay. I pretty sure you guys would agree, but I just wanted to kind of make certain hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, certainly I think, Christians, when they're lending money to each other, I think they would, at the very least, frown upon charging your fellow Christian brothers and sisters interest. But, and in general, I think it's best to not borrow money if you can avoid doing so. But that's a whole different thing.
Only the government will learn that.
Right? Yeah. You know what you do, Caleb, is you sell a bunch of treasury notes, and then when they come up to expire, you pay them by selling more treasury notes.
Oh.
And you just keep doing this. You know what I mean? It's fine.
Sounds good to me. I mean, you need the population to be in debt so you can control the population.
It's just like
exactly-
it's literally just like I paid off a credit card with my other credit card, and then I paid off my credit card with another credit card. It's like
The holy trinity of credit card debt. You have 3 credit cards from 2 different companies, and you just keep the payments cycling.
Well, we have to apply subsidiarity here, and just that's what I need. Like, we all just need to start issuing. Like, Caleb needs to issue Caleb treasury notes, and then when they come due, just pay them off in new Caleb treasury notes. I'm going to invest in Caleb coin. That's my new investment strategy. Is
Right,
Caleb's
any
making
currency.
NFTs.
I
Oh,
would love
gosh.
making NFT.
all right. Well, we're coming up on time here, guys.
It's like, and we're done with. Sorry, go ahead.
You brought up NFTs. I'm out.
Dude, what is an NFT? Can someone explain it to me? I don't know.
No,
It's a image that you pay money to own because that's how the internet works.
I think the idea is it's you can use encryption and blockchain stuff to verify that, okay, I've an original owner of whatever image it is. So if anyone says, you can go back and check the record and say, okay, who's the originator of this data?
I love to
Okay.
screenshot it and say, now I own it too.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing is, like, it's still transferred, but like you couldn't like you would not be the owner of record, but you could still have
Yeah.
it because it's
It's
again
just-
it's
it's
not
a
real
very
property.
It
It's
just
expensive
data.
seems
keeping
like
process.
I'm like I thought we didn't believe in intellectual property, and now we do, and I don't. Whatever. I don't get it.
Listen, I don't know anything about intellectual property anymore. Kinsella and I are blocked each other, and so now we just don't. I've forgotten all about it.
Dude, some of the best people in our movement are just like too autistic for their own good.
I wouldn't
mean-
consider him one of the best people in the movement at all, but okay.
I mean, he's contributed, some good. I don't know.
And
There's-
if you want to be a Hopper student, Hughesman is a much better Hopper student than Kinsella. Also, who's good at Hughesman is a Catholic, and so really quick,
God,
And
there's
therefore
so many-
automatically better.
it's like I just
obviously.
and we didn't get into it because like I didn't want to put you guys on the spot without like giving you like I would if I was going to do a Q&A about my objections to Catholicism, I would want to give you my objections ahead of time so you'd have time
Sure.
to prepare.
I'd be actually down to do it later, though, if you wanted to.
Yeah, we can maybe do that another time. But it's just like on one hand, there are so many things on a theological level that I disagree with Catholics on, but then on a personal and philosophical level, and also in a sort of like historical cultural analysis, I don't know. I'm more and more cringed out by Protestantism because it seems to me to be like a road to nowhere, and it's like
Well, it
what-
leads somewhere.
well, to nowhere good. I mean, it's like, and I posed this question on Twitter, and I was like, what, like, where in the Protestant world is anybody having any effect on the culture? And then people the only answer I got was like, well, what are Catholics? And I'm like, well, I'm not saying they're perfect, but like they have to, like, if there's anywhere in the conservative Christian world where anything has been conserved, it's in the Catholic Church and in the Orthodox Church. Protestants haven't conserved shit. The Protestants might have conserved less than Republicans, and that's saying something. So it's just like, again, it's sort of like, judge a tree by its fruit. It's like, okay, well, I have some issues with this one tree, but this other tree is just like, it's not producing fruit, it's just producing more trees. It's like the tree keeps cutting itself in half into more and more trees. And they're just getting smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where they're not even trees anymore. They're just shrubbery and they're useless. So yeah, I don't know. That's where I'm at. I'm still trying to figure out where the heck I'm supposed to go. I don't have a theological home.
Well,
Also, my main take on Protestants, sort of the opposite of what we were talking about with objectivism earlier, is I have serious problems with Protestantism. But all the Protestants I know are like I've loved them more than most Catholic. There's too many obnoxious Catholics. Like I love the Catholic Church, but I love Protestants probably more than like a lot of the Catholics that I know. So
I'm the
it's,
opposite, but maybe that's because I only know like the fundamentalists.
you get to see the inside of the nitty gritty. You probably know some awful Protestants.
Well,
Like,
down,
they're awful,
I don't know
but-
where you live, AC,
About
but like
that
down south, there's a lot of like Southern fundamental Baptists, and they're the cringiest of the Protestant movement.
That's what I'm
I
super
bet
excited
you-
about.
The three of us are
is,
probably within like 500 miles of each other. Should need to do a meetup at some point. Yeah, no, they're crazy, but they're lovely people.
I'm actually super excited for this. There's a big get together one of my friends having when he's he moved away. He's come back down, so he's inviting everybody to his house to hang out. And I'm gonna see a bunch of the old church friends I haven't seen in like a year. And I know what they're gonna say because I've gotten texts about it saying, "Hey, I haven't seen you at church in a while. Are you okay?" And all of them assume I'm an atheist now. I don't go to church anymore. And so I'm very excited to tell them I'm Catholic.
No, a lot of them
and
would probably
watch this.
prefer you be an atheist to a Catholic.
I know they
right?
would. I know they would because I remember I would make before I was Catholic. I held a lot of Catholic positions, and I would make the Catholic case for something, and they'd just be like, "You might as well be an atheist if you believe that." I'm like, okay, shut up.
You need to find somebody to just be completely over the top with like your presentation, just like show up like with a rosary draped around your neck, just a crucifix in each. Just go as over the top as possible with the
I
Catholicism.
might still open a habit. I might get online
Sure,
by a habit.
yeah.
All right,
You guys,
Claim you're a nun now.
Here's one quick question, which I feel like is one you guys would be able to answer, and I think I've already seen the answer to this, but I think like some of the anti-Catholic Protestants straw man Catholics and say that the sacramental system is a distortion of the gospel because it sort of suggests that salvation comes from works within the Catholic Church and sort of like doing certain things, and that your salvation is never secure, essentially, which I don't know, I'm not an expert on this, but from what I've heard from Catholics, I don't think that's true. I think that the system that you guys have is less about like you're not saved if you don't do this, but more about like this is the normative means by which God through which Jesus works to continually forgive you and keep you on the path to
sacraments are to help
repentance
you
and going after
get through
him.
life. The sacraments are to help you get through.
Right.
Things.
It's not a means to salvation. It's not like you're not saved without it, but it's sort of like it is the intended path that God wants your salvation to be walked through. And while you can walk other paths, like you don't have to use the sacramental system, I think Catholics would say, but they would say like you're making it harder by not doing it. Is that accurate? Or I don't know if it's not, that's sort of what I've gleaned from some of the Catholics that I've listened to on the subject.
Yeah, I think that's okay. The thing that I think is really important to focus on is that we are what is it? I think it's the letter of St. James, that faith without works is dead. Is that there's we need to live that faith. We need to act that faith, and we don't just exist in our minds like we've been talking about. We're sense creatures. We exist in the world. We interact with the world, and so you say, okay, there's the sacraments are certain things that God wants us to do to go along that path. That's true of anything in our life. We manifest what we do. It's not just about what I believe. It's not just about what I think or whether I'm saved or not, but I need to go out and live that faith and do those things. And it's because we are embodied and because we are physical creatures and because we interact with beauty and with real substances. And that's how we know the world and that's how we can learn to know God. That the actions we do matter and have meaning, just manifestly.
Let me put it this way: like, does salvation come through the sacramental system, or does it come through accepting what Jesus did on the cross?
It comes through accepting what Jesus did on the cross. But if you accept that and you accept His church, then you want to do what He tells you to do, right? You want to live that faith as well. And if one of the things is here are ways to access that grace, or to be more able to make things easier to live that life, you want to go and do those things.
I would agree, but I guess like the only worry that I would have is like, is it again? That's kind of what I said. Like I can understand the argument. Like, well, the sacramental system isn't what saves you, but this is what God, instructs us to do in terms of walking that path of salvation. But it's not like it's possible for people to be in error, but to still be saved.
Depends on the nature of the error, I would say. But
on this topic, like for
okay.
Protestants who are not partaking in the sacramental system, I think Catholics would say they are still saved. They're just they are walking a path of salvation that is not the optimal path that God created through what you guys would call.
They're making it harder for themselves. Take reconciliation or confession, for example. Is we have access to this grace to try and help ourselves. And can you manage without that? Sure. Is it a lot more difficult if you're unable to relieve that burden of sin with some regularity. It's the sacraments are available to you so that you can have a lot easier time being saved, and so you can live that life more fully. I mean, there is real grace. Catholics, there is real grace in the sacraments to help you continue to maintain your faith and to live a good life. They talk about the Eucharist being sort of bread for the journey. This is something to strengthen you on your way, and you can do without it, I guess, maybe. But I mean,
the part that I have a hard time wrapping my head around is the idea that there's some sort of literal grace or literal presence in the sacraments or the Eucharist. But the value that I find is that, like, I think that it's more of a psychological or spiritual value in terms of, like, I think what makes it easier is that doing things within a tradition and within a system that is sort of that's oriented around I'm trying to figure out how to word this, that's sort of oriented around the sort of biblical and godly archetypes that we observe. And sort of like, I think the sacramental system, sort of like, doing confession and all that is, these are ways to walk, to walk your path with Christ, to repent when you sin in ways that are a benefit to you because of the ways in which they are pointing you towards Christ and helping to orient you in a full sense, both body, mind, and spirit towards Christ. Does that make sense? Like that's at least the way that I would construe it. I sometimes I think where Protestants like me get a little, pushback, or we don't quite agree, is like the idea that, like, because it sounds weird to say like, oh, these things have like the presence of grace in them, like, because it's the implication could be like, oh, what Jesus did on the cross wasn't enough, like he didn't fully save you, and so you have to keep going back and getting like, re-upped on your grace or you'll lose your salvation, is sort of the assumption or the interpretation that a lot of Protestants have of that Catholic system.
Right, and I don't think we want to dive too deep into it, but there's this idea, okay, you can be like, you can fall back into sin, you can fall to temptation, as you can accept, and I know some Protestant denominations would probably disagree with this, but you can sit there and say, okay, you can profess your faith, and then you can do something horrible, you can lose your faith, you can relapse back into sin or into
That's definitely where I would disagree with that.
Okay, yeah. So that this is, and so would you say if you do that, then it wasn't ever a true conversion? I've heard that argument.
Right.
Before.
Exactly. That's exactly. To me, if somebody, and I think this is what Paul says. He's like, they departed from you, so you would know that they were never actually that they were never actually one of us. Basically, is what Paul said. Like I'm paraphrasing there, but that's what he. Sure. It's basically what he says. They departed from us so that they were new, that we would know that they were never one of us. So it's a false conversion.
And so, I mean, we could spend hours on this.
I know we could, yeah.
And so I don't want to dive too deep into it, but yeah. But so if I think that's gonna be a key point of contention that sort of would need to get resolved for these things to make sense. Is if,
I just think if you can
have a true conversion, and then if you can still relapse into sin, and maybe not even lose your faith, but if mortal sin is a thing, if you can act in a way or believe in a way or feel in a way, they can sever that relationship with God. By your own action, even after you've converted or after you've given your faith, then there's a purpose for the sacraments. The sacraments can have a role. But yeah, I don't want to dive into it, but I think that's something that's the sort of key issue that would need to be resolved. Is can I fall from grace after my baptism, essentially?
2 things real quick. I just sent you a link to a book that is the book on salvation from Great Dominican. You should check it out. Also, I have to be at work in like 5 hours.
Yeah, no, we're gonna close up here.
Yeah, I would love to do a part 2 on this if you would like send it in advance and prep for it. But if we could, I'm exhausted, y'all.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching. Thanks, Caleb. Thanks, AC, for joining in. And yeah, I think it was a good conversation, and we'll definitely do a part 2 sometime down the road. So you guys want to give your plugs quick before we head out?
And Gath, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So at Eincath on Twitter, anarchocatholic.substack.com is where I do some of my Catholic writing, some of my anarchist writing. I'm also one of the contributors for Austratomism, which I think is currently at paleotomism.com. We'll probably get that fixed at some point. But yeah, no, really appreciate you having us on, Jacob. It's been a really fun conversation.
Cool.
Yeah, paleotomism.com, Austratomism on Twitter, Caleb Brown 549 on Twitter, Face Living Praxis on YouTube. Go subscribe to Adam Netter's podcast because he's great. I gotta plug Adam, so I think you should definitely get subscribed to his. So. Oh, that was great. But yeah, that's my plugs. Come follow me, and if you're not stupid, I won't block you. So.
Fair enough. All right. Thanks again, guys, for coming on. Thanks everybody for watching. And remember, until next time, don't fear the fire.